Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk, and I have Matt Knight, who usually produces the show on with me tonight. Dave is unable to be here tonight, so we are going to talk three subjects. And the first one we're going to talk, Matt, is there's been some revelations, maybe revelations, I don't know, a lot of speculation about the Nord Stream pipeline. Two stories broke out in the past week on that. And of course, this is the natural gas pipeline, which had an explosion under the water some months ago. There's a lot of speculation as to who was responsible for it and how it happened. And of course, the most obvious suspect was Russia. But then there are questions, why would Russia sabotage their own line? Well, there are reasons for that, why they might have done it. But then Seymour Hersh did, initially became famous for breaking the My Lai massacre story way back in the 60s. Has been, broken other stories, and he anyways. But then since then, apparently Germany has concluded that it's possibly a pro-Ukrainian group who did it. So it's uncertain as to who has done it. Is the United States and Germany now doing that to deflect against the United States doing it? Matt, you have any thoughts on this? I've got some thoughts on why each of the suspects, might have been done, and we'll do kind of a Mrs. Scarlet with the candlestick in the lounge, type of thing.
Well, I sort of look at it as a Schrodinger's cat sort of situation. It may have been one or all three or none of them, and it served all of their purposes. Are the United States, the Ukrainian purposes, and the Russian purposes in one way or another. So it's almost like it's working out for all of them in one way or another. I have a hard time going with the Americans doing it, although you would think that it would take some pretty special capabilities to get down there and do that. And whoever did that knew exactly what they're doing. So, it's possible, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that, Matt. You were saying something else?
I was just going to say on the pro-Ukrainian group, which pro-Ukrainian group, and are they really a pro-Ukrainian group, or things are very murky, and so you can say one group is a pro-Ukrainian group. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. And then the Russians, I think, they were using or aimed to use energy as a weapon. And so this suits their purposes really well. And I think they thought that, without their petrochemicals, that, the European Union would cave to them. And I think they obviously found out that that's not the case. But going into that, no one could have known that the cohesiveness of the alliance would have stuck together as well as it has, and the people of Europe have really just adapted and gone on with their lives, and even with the hardship of not having natural gas.
Yeah, I'll just point out there's memes all over the internet too. Apparently somebody found a photo of Greta Thunberg doing some skin diving, and so the joke is that was her who went down. But I think pretty sure it requires scuba gear. But anyway, she can't hold her breath that long. Looking into the different motives each side would have, it helps and hurts all of them. The United States, of course, is a suspect because, well, this, makes it so that the Russians can't deliver natural gas to Europe, so that's money not going to Russia to pay for the natural gas. On the other hand, as you mentioned, the United States is under pressure trying to keep this coalition together. And one of the things it's having trouble with is a unified energy policy with regard to Russia. So it's having that natural gas might have made that a little bit easier if there wasn't quite as much danger of Europeans being cold, right? And, and without it. So on the other hand, Russia would say, well, why would they blow up their own pipeline? Well, Russia might want to be in a position to deprive Europe of the gas to put pressure on the coalition for the same reasons we talked about, but they don't want their subsidiaries to get sued in the West for breaching a contract. They could lose a lot of money and go under. So but you can't sue for breach of contract. You can sue, but you lose on a defense of impossibility if there are forces that you can't control that make it impossible for you to deliver on the contract. You may not be held accountable for it. So if some group blew up the pipeline, those subsidiaries are safe. Ukraine, of course, has a mixed thing. The same reasons for both the United States. They want to put pressure on it, but they also don't want money going to Russia. It could possibly be there. The question is there any pro-Ukrainian group with that capability? I mean, that's that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, this whole thing, the Europeans have benefited from a reasonably mild winter this year.
Yes.
If it had been super cold and, they've had the polar vortex like, some of North America has had, you might see people falling out of this, alliance and saying, hey, we've got to have this. And of course, the United States has also stepped up with gas deliveries and right. Careful stockpiling by the German government and other governments. Put stuff away for the winter has kept the heat on, if you will, in a lot of places over there. So it's kind of negated a lot of the effect of the pipeline going down.
Yeah, which kind of undermines the theory that Russia would do it, because what this does is it forces Europeans to set up some types of alternatives, whether it's alternative power sources or alternative sources of natural gas or a combination. This means that maybe Europe doesn't have to come back to that pipeline, right? Right. And so the long-term interests aren't done in, but see, you can see how each of the suspects would benefit and be hurt, and maybe being hurt is worse. But then again, sometimes these actions aren't always clearly thought out either, even if it's the United States. We've done things that have blown up in our face, literally, and so that it doesn't mean necessarily. It is very interesting, though, that we don't know this so much later, that we've got Seymour Hersh's highly speculative article, and it's in the New York Times. You can, if you look up Seymour Hersh pipeline, but he puts all the reliance on one anonymous source who is quote unquote familiar with the process and seems to be legally knowledgeable. Generally speaking, if you're going to use an anonymous source, you need to corroborate things a little bit more. It's not enough. Hey, trust me, I'm Seymour Hersh, and there's this guy or woman, who knows, but that is telling me this stuff, and you got to provide some insight as to why you're relying on this. And all he does is he cites the source, and that's Drudge. Drudge has the one source rule. If somebody's telling me something, it's fair for me to publish. Whereas most others, it's either two or more anonymous sources, or something to corroborate it to give it some type of credibility other than, hey, I'm Seymour. Trust me.
And interesting to note, when it comes to a country like Russia, there are a lot of independent actors that act unilaterally. You've all heard about the Wagner Group, and
yes.
But there are FSB and other groups that have capabilities to do these kind of things that may not be acting in the name of the Russian government per se, but could also be just out on their own, freelancing, if you will. So, and again, I think that also applies to the Ukrainian situation, the quote unquote pro-Ukrainian group. Well, there's a lot of actors over there doing a lot of different things, and whether you can lay that to Zelensky's government or not, I'm skeptical. Let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are definitely a lot of people who have an interest in making things happen, who may or may not, be operating in an official capacity. That's true. There's a lot of players that way, and it's just hard to know because we don't have a lot of evidence. I mean, it's not like there's a forensic, anything you can really do about it, and we may never know. It'll be one of those mysteries. But the politics of it are interesting, though. I mean, again, it's amazing. Seymour Hersh, I mean, he's got a lot of credibility, but he also does have a little bit of a history of questionable reliance on people. And the rest. And it's great that he broke Malaya. I forget what else he broke about 20 years ago that was a similar nature, but it's definitely, I need more than what he presented. He cited a couple of things that are common knowledge, but the whole article was this one source. And
it's kind of reminiscent of another topic that we're going to be discussing in a little bit, in that, it's a sort of a maybe thing, and why are we talking about it if we don't have, well, I know why we're talking about it, but I mean, why are we the larger we're talking about it if we don't actually have any conclusive proof? It's really just boils down to speculation, sort of the Comey letter,
right. Yeah, which turned out to be a complete dud. It's just.
I just wanted to mention that just saw a really interesting doc about Russia trying to expand its sphere of influence or get its sphere of influence back. And what's happening in places like Kazakhstan and Tajikistan is that they have they're resource rich and they're building their own pipelines. Mm-hmm. Some of them are going to China, but there's also a pipeline project in the works that is going to look to cross the Strait of Gibraltar and go into Europe. There's got to be alternate paths, and if the Russians did do this to themselves, I think you're right when you said before, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot. People are now weaned off of Russian dependence on Russian petrochemicals, and they're looking elsewhere for them, and other people will step into the breach and will supply them. So if they did this, I think they've just killed a market for themselves.
There are other things too. Germany is actually seriously considering reversing its policy on nuclear. They've opened up a couple of coal plants, unfortunately, and France is barely affected by any of this because they're like 70% nuclear, right? And of course, as we've discussed on this show, there is a younger generation of environmentalists who say that the new nuclear technologies aren't as risky as the old, especially if you go with the liquid cores and the smaller plants versus the mega plants. Problem with those forms of nuclear power is they don't generate the byproducts that the military industry wants, so it doesn't get it won't get those funds, those subsidies. But it's a whole new possibility, and of course we're talking about fusion now being here in 10, 20 years. So yeah, we're looking at alternatives. Everybody is, and it kind of like the oil companies kind of blew it here in California or in the United States. It generated all of a sudden a huge expansion in the market for electric cars. Whether or not that's a panacea is beside the point. Once people switch to electric, they tend to not switch back.
Well, and there's even talk in Germany who, had kind of made the decision to close all their nuclear plants about, maybe not going that way and either reviving or slowing down the closing of those plants. So, yeah, I mean, somebody's going to step in to fill the void. So that's why these kinds of things are sort of self-defeating no matter who does them.
It does, yeah. I mean, personally, I'd rather they open the nuclear plants than the coal plants, but that's, it's, and I'm saying that as somebody who was arrested outside Diablo Canyon back in the 1980s, with it. I mean, I still question the wisdom of dropping a plant like that on top of one of the most active earthquake faults on the planet. But there's a lot of things to be.
Eric, the land was cheap.
Yeah, well, could have gotten even cheaper. But anyway, we've got a lot of the technology isn't the same. It's advanced. I'm willing to take a second look at it. Apparently, Germany is now too. So it's just anyway. You want to close it out, Matt?
I'm just going to say, these kind of reports, I think, are sort of self-defeating and sort of useless. There's already conspiratorial bent, throughout this country and a lot of the world. And these sort of things just add fuel to that. I'm all for getting to the bottom of it and
Sure.
for finding out who actually did this, but I think it's kind of a nothing burger.
Yeah, even Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't jumping on this, right? Maybe she'll jump on the Ukrainian one, but she didn't want to even jump on the Seymour Hersh. It seems to be mostly people on the left. It got some play on democracy now, but most people are looking at it and saying, okay, I expected a little more here. So we'll see. So that takes us to the next topic.
In private, you wouldn't expect Lachlan Murdoch, the CEO of Fox, to be a Trump critic, but apparently he is denouncing or has denounced the former president in fairly harsh terms this year. He has even gone as far as to say that if the former president were to run again for that office, that he believes it would be damaging to the country. Now, that said, Lachlan Murdoch in private has also stressed that the Fox News audience still remains largely supportive of the former president. So I think he knows that he might have his own personal feelings regarding Trump, but that the Fox audience, if the channel were to overtly become critical of the former president, they might dump the channel and flee somewhere else. It would be a very bad business decision, but Lachlan Murdoch in private seems to be pretty critical of the former president.
All right, a lot of news with regard to Fox News, and it's hard to, at this point, it's hard to even consider it a serious news source. I do want to caution, though, because there is a distinction between these commentators who put all of these people up. Of course, we've talked in the past about how Tucker Carlson, Hannity, Ingraham, all of them basically knew there's emails revealing that they knew they were putting liars on, that Powell was a liar, that Giuliani was a liar, and yet they did it anyway because they got into trouble because their news department actually reported and were the first of any network to call the Arizona election for Biden on election night. That seriously undermined the whole Trump strategy for challenging the election. And the interesting thing about it is that there's now more revelations, and I'm not quite sure exactly what type of pleading this was attached to. Usually what happens with the summary judgment motion in California, and I'm assuming it's not much different back east, is that you file a summary judgment motion, the other side gets to file an answer, and then you file a reply brief. But I was looking back, it's not saying exactly, the articles aren't saying exactly what pleading this is, but this is a supplemental pleading that Dominion has filed in its summary judgment motion prior to the trial next month. And it's got some totally new revelations in it, including one of the Fox denialists that they put onto the air over and over again was somebody who also said that in emails to them that she could time travel and that the wind was trying to tell her that she's a ghost and she didn't believe it. Well, I guess it's good that she didn't believe it, but somehow the wind was doing it. And
the wind is a liar.
That's right. Yes. And another revelation. Another revelation that came out today was, unlike Murdoch, Hannity, Carlson, and Ingraham, all of whom knew Trump's claims of election fraud were false, and one of them even called Giuliani an effing liar. but they put him on anyway. Maria Bartiromo, I hope I'm saying it right. Bartiromo, okay. Bartoloma, okay. She does a morning show. Apparently, she was totally convinced of the that the election was stolen. Apparently, she's up on it, and the rest of the Fox people are kind of laughing at her, I guess. But she was a true believer, so she wasn't lying. At least she believed what she was doing. Fox News producer said in an email that Fox News watchers did not want to hear the term peaceful transition. So a memo went out saying, kind of like a memo of 20 years ago when they said homicide bombers rather than suicide bombers. Fox News does this. They want the term. So no mention of peaceful transition during that January time. Laura Ingraham, despite saying that the election denial was a lie, was livid with Fox News reporting team, which called Arizona and was calling for the people to be fired for reporting on what she admitted was the truth. I mean, and they couldn't produce even one email, apparently in discovery, in which a prominent Fox person advocated for actually reporting the news truthfully and objectively. Not one person in there was even making that argument. And lastly, kind of interesting, email that they hadn't released the first time around, Tucker Carlson saying of Trump, "I hate him passionately."
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
I mean, it's just absolutely, and these are the new revelations coming on the heels of the very selective editing of the videos by Tucker Carlson, exactly what he and others have accused the January 6th committee of doing, which, yeah, who knows, maybe they did it too, but cherry picking things, including showing peaceful demonstrators all around, right? So to suggest that it wasn't violent, I mean, during those times, kind of like, Jack the Ripper only murdered 4 women. That's 4 days. Most of the rest of the days he was peaceful, right? I mean, it's just, Bin Laden, that was just one day that he blew up buildings, right? I mean, all the rest of the time he wasn't doing stuff, So anyway, but that's what they put is evidence. But the problem is it's blown back at him. Senate Republicans are slamming him. One of them called it BS, only spelled it out. And even other Fox personalities are like saying that was a joke. I mean, did you not think that you could be taken, your presentation could be taken to pieces easily? That's not what Fox News needed. And then he doubled down on Monday with more election denialism after all this other stuff. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, there's no self-awareness there. I mean, it's just completely, they're not even pretending. And of course, Tucker Carlson's defense before it's something like this is, well, I'm an entertainer, not a news person. That was his legal defense, and it worked out for him. I mean, I'm sure you've got plenty to say about this, Matt.
Well, I think it was an article from Politico, or actually it was Esquire, and I'm just going to quote it here. It said, "The extended farce on which Fox is going to go on for a while, and the rest of us are obligated to poke as much fun at it as we can at the ruined tree on which Carlson has hung the bleeding carcass of his professional career."
Of course.
You talk about having it both ways. And, you mentioned the Republicans, and of course, Mitch McConnell came out and said, he wants to associate himself with the chief of police of the Capitol, who about what happened on January 6th. And he said it was a mistake, in my view, for Fox News to depict this in a way completely at variance with what our chief law enforcement of the Capitol has said. That's a Senate Republican, of course. There's the House, which is going to be a whole different circus.
Right. But, McCarthy's being attacked too for having given the stuff to Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
But you mentioned some of these quotes, and I cherry picked a couple of them myself. On January 4th, 2021, Carlson said, "We're very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. I truly can't wait." And then on the 7th, he said, F Trump, He's a demonic force, destroyer, but he's not going to destroy us. I've been thinking about this every day for 4 years. And he also said in that same email, Trump has 2 weeks left. Once he's out, he becomes incalculably less powerful, even in the minds of his supporters. So, I mean, you know, that this is on the minds of the people that are putting out the big lie, if you will. They know how destructive it is. But, you know, the thing about, you know, Fox News and a lot of news organizations is that, you know, the thing that is most important is the bottom line. And so eyeballs on your channels, eyeballs on your websites and your advertisers. And this is the be all and end all of news nowadays. It's you know, varying degrees depending on the outlet, of course. But I think Fox has taken it to the nth degree, which is, you know, we'll go anyway. In the words of, you know, Queen, any way the wind blows, you know, it doesn't really matter to me. So that, you know, there is a, you know, a political, philosophical bent to what they do. But mostly the bent, I think, is towards the almighty dollar.
That's true, but this is also, I mean, eventually it's going to hurt them. I mean, right now, sure, they've got millions, maybe even tens of millions of people who are caught up in their stuff and watch nothing else. I mean, you know, we all have heard about people who have parents in their 70s and 80s who watch Fox News and only Fox News and narrow their sources, and they present that as a defense. I mean, as I've mentioned on the show before, I frequent forums online where there are conservatives, and I test things out. And I brought this whole thing up about Fox News, and about 3 or 4 of them today said, well, Fox News, Tucker Carlson's ratings are higher than both MSNBC's and CNN's combined, and #1. And it's like, yeah, but that's cable news. Cable people who even have cable are very select people. PBS NewsHour in one night has more than all 3 of the cable news networks. You're right. So, granted, it plays several times a night too, but still, it's but I think that does on cable actually too. Actually, I think Tucker Carlson plays later at night too. So but that is their measure. And it is going to make the dollar, but maybe at a certain point it won't, especially if they start losing listeners. Well, they were losing watchers to OAN and Newsmax, and that's why they really started peddling the election denial without allowing any kind of rebuttal. But they could get hit with, I mean, the Dominion is asking for $1.5 billion. That's huge. Smartmatic is asking for a lot of money. They're also sued the other 2 companies I just noted, and they probably will have a harder time surviving. But this is a very short-term, I think, investment with Murdoch. And of course, Murdoch won't apologize, because apologizing means admitting to all of your viewers that they were lied to. So, you know, it's so I think they would almost rather have a judgment against him and try to come up with the money to pay $1.5 billion than settle. You know, it's just because then they could just say, oh, that's the liberal court system.
Right. Well, I was going to say that I don't know how a summary judgment would work if they could be made to, say, for a week, lead off every news hour and every commentary show with the fact that we, in fact, lied to you about all of this. As part of a settlement, you could say, well, you only have to pay $1 billion if you will say to your viewers that we not only do we lie to you, but none of us ever believed it.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
None of us did. Well, Maria Bartoloma, you know,
right.
she was the one. She was the outlier.
Right.
But yeah, so. I don't know, you know, when the bubble will burst, but it will burst eventually. And either, I mean, talk about being hoisted on your own petard. You know, this is something that will come back and eventually bite them. And it hopefully will cost them a lot of money, not only in judgments or settlements, but in viewership, and people will just drift away and to whatever other right-wing media that suits them better. But my hope is that at the end of this, that they will be made to admit publicly and frequently that they in fact lied to their watchers and listeners.
But that would just undo them. Their whole shtick is not doing that. Not only would they be admitting they lied, but it's also to apologize is weak. That's that they see that as weak. That's why Republican politicians rarely apologize, because people don't want it. It's they just mush along. But I think that what we've learned today is that a lot of the Fox News other people really think that Carlson blew it with this the January 6th not doctored but cherry-picked videos, because it's just so easy for their opponents, which they've already done, their opponents being the rest of the media, to say, well, here's the full context. When you play the whole video, here it is. And yes, it was peaceful on the east side for a while, but on the west side, cops were getting beaten up. So you don't show that. At any rate, it's just but they've got a problem now, and I think internally they realize Carlson should not. If this was bad timing, weeks before the trial. I mentioned last week that it's very unusual for a plaintiff to file summary judgment. It's usually what a defendant does, to say there is no case, and it's unlikely that a summary judgment motion will be granted, because when you're saying summary judgment, you're saying there's just no argument. You don't have evidence, or if you have the evidence, this is what it poses. There is no argument. There's no triable issue of fact, and it's rare that a plaintiff would be granted that. But they're conditioning the jury pool. That's what the Fox's lawyers are saying, and it's probably true, but there's no law against that. And Carlson has probably just helped him out again. But again, you've got these people that are in the bubble, the Fox News bubble, that watch Fox News and only Fox News or OAN and Newsmax. I don't know if Newsmax or OAN are covering this, but Fox is not discussing the Dominion lawsuit, and they're not discussing all of the blowback at Tucker Carlson.
Yeah. It's the old the monkeys, the three monkeys: hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Well, they're speaking evil, but not the evil that would undo their watcher and viewership.
Yeah, they just got to hope that those people never start watching other media, because it's just. But there is it just reminds me though of that scene in the clip in 1984. If you ever read the novel, there's a point where, whether it was a mistake or something, all of a sudden the enemy switched from, I forget, Eurasia to whatever, and everybody ran to replace all the posters, tearing down the old ones, and did it because they just don't want to deal with cognitive dissonance, and that is the conditioning on it. And it's just it is hard to get a Fox News person to do these quotes that you're quoting and the emails. There are people online who will say that's all made up by the MSM. It's not really happening, and it's just when you got the power of denial. I mean, we all get into our bubbles. We all don't want to change our minds about things. It's very difficult, but sometimes we sometimes resist it. But man, it's extreme. Let me close it down.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was a fresh air on the other day about QAnon and about all of the predictions that Pelosi and Biden will all be taken to Guantanamo and all this sort of stuff, and on XY date. And then when that didn't happen, then the people just kind of readjusted their view of reality and what actually is going to happen. And I think, there are a lot of people that will do this with the Fox News thing. They'll just shrug and go back to what they were doing.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next topic. Okay, the winter. We've been experiencing the winter. You mentioned in Europe it's been warmer than normal. I think it's been colder than normal here, certainly in California. We've had this drought that's kind of been going on for about 2 decades. We've had a few years where it kind of was broken up, but we've had lower than normal rainfall for something like over 1,200 years in California and in the western part of the United States, which is possibly naturally arid. Some people argue that we've been sort of enjoying a wet period. But whether or not it's caused by warming, we've had these fires, we have water shortages, towns without water. And now this winter, we're having one of the wettest and snowiest winters ever. Right now, we are second this year in terms of snowfall in the Sierras and the Trinity Alps and all of that. There was more snow during 1983, or during the 82-83 year. That's when we really got hit with a lot of snow. But there's some people anticipating that by April we will now move into the most snow on record. Smacks account for 70% of the water in California on a normal year. And so people are asking, and reservoirs are filling up, and the reservoirs that aren't filled up are expected to fill up. The one in Oroville is the second largest reservoir after the Shasta Reservoir. I'm not sure what capacity Shasta is right now, but Oroville's at 60%, anticipated to be 100%. They're worried about floods when the snow starts to melt because some of these reservoirs could be overloaded. So the question is the drought over? A lot of people are thinking that. Well, the answer is no. For one thing, we've been pulling groundwater for so many years that it would take several years of this at least to replenish the water basins underground. And we also don't know, we've had a couple of years kind of like this over the past 20 years, but then next year the ridiculously resilient ridge or whatever it is comes back and we have dry Januaries and Februaries like last year. So, but the politics, there's going to be a lot of pressure to lift a lot of things. Maybe it'll take some pressure off of the politics around the Colorado River right now, as everybody is fighting for that water, which is just like the biggest watershed in the nation. But the drought isn't over. But what do you think is going to be the politics of this year's weather, and where will it take us?
Well, I think it takes the heat off temporarily sorry, bad pun. It takes the heat off of the politicians for a little while. I think most people basically don't want to think about climate change, and it gives them an out to just say, well, we've got all the water we need. But as you mentioned, these things are a multi-year phenomenon, and just one season we could have next year could be back to the drought season, and we'd be right back where we are. But I think it is a temporary reprieve for a lot of the politics, and you mentioned the Colorado River, which is an intractable problem between these states where they have competing claims for a finite amount of water, and it's not even a finite amount of water; it's a fictional amount of water, or amount of water that was overestimated when they first put these agreements together, as Colorado never had the flow that they predicted. And so that the emperor has no clothes, has really become apparent in the last couple of years. I'm pretty pessimistic about any sort of climate change, measures under any circumstances. It's just too politically hard, too politically charged. People don't want to give up their lifestyles. They don't want to give up their lawns. They don't want to give up their golf courses. Humans are sort of inherently selfish and myopic in a lot of ways. And I really don't think I hate to say this, but I really don't think that even if the drought had continued through this year, that any meaningful climate change legislation would have been enacted.
Yeah, on a national level, certainly. California, of course, we've got a number of things going on, but there's pressure to reverse them. But it's true. I don't know if you've seen the.
Unfortunately, Eric, the climate doesn't really know state boundaries.
Right. Yeah.
So over, in Washington or Nevada or wherever, it just kind of creeps across the border. So whatever we do is, finger in a dam, I think, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we got problems. You've still got the people who say, okay, they finally admit that there is warming, but they say, but it's just natural. This happens all the time. It's not man-made, so there's nothing we can do about it. So we shouldn't even try to do anything about it. And then the second one is people who are climate change people are saying, well, the droughts actually are natural cycles and not related to climate change. I find that hard to believe as well, that it's not at least being aggravated. But we did have droughts in the 1970s. I remember that first one, and then later in the early 90s, and it seemed like they were cyclical. But this 20 years, it's a long time. But you're right. It's that the answer even that people want to push is more storage of water, which I'm not opposed to. But they're talking about a big Calusa one and the rest, but more reservoirs and the rest. But in Southern California, there were engineers that were actually warned about this possibility and said, you need to build reservoirs. And it's like, what? That's space that we can't drop housing projects onto, right? Or malls, I mean, so there are very few reservoirs, certainly to collect rainwater in Los Angeles because of that very myopic policy way back when, just didn't anticipate that, we've built a city out in the middle of the desert and Los Angeles and, the Colorado River will always provide that much. And I don't even know how much the Colorado River ever even makes it to the Gulf of Mexico anymore, at least for how much of the year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are whole communities in Arizona that have basically been cut off from municipal water. And whatever water they do get, they have to truck in at great expense. This is just going to keep going this way.
Right.
It's kind of you get the reverse aspect of houses that are allowed to be built in floodplains.
Right.
So then your problem, of course, is too much water at that point. But it just seems like the forces of capital, always manage to push the boundaries and convince somebody that, okay, building this housing tract in the middle of the Sonoran Desert is a good idea and that we'll be able to supply its residents with water. I'm also reminded of, desalinization talk for a while. And in fact, I think Southern California actually built a desalinization plant.
Yes.
And then as soon as it started in a previous drought situation, and as soon as it started to rain again, they mothballed it, and it's since been dismantled. So, and then as the drought comes on again, then you hear people say, well, let's build, we could desalinize the water. Israel does it. It's, it would work for our 18 million people in Southern California. And, about the time it gets built, or if it does get built, not to mention the huge amount of energy
it takes.
The desalinization plant uses, that then contributes to climate, to the climate problem. It's just a snake eating its tail, really.
And we're already under pressure because we've got to now upgrade the energy grid to deal with electric cars, which is going to be, it can be done and it will be done, but it's going to be a problem. So if we start having to rely on desalinization, just again, that full, but the whole thing does remind you of that old joke about, the guy who visits his farmer friend and the farmer's complaining about how the hole in his roof of his barn is causing these huge leaks and making it impossible for him to do his work. And then the visitor comes back in the summer and says, well, you haven't would fix that hole? It says, well, it's not leaking. So, it's just, I mean, that is basically how things operate. In the meantime, you'll have people, always like, well, there's no global warming. It's cold outside. Look how cold it is, and people I had a client who actually had to be rescued by the sheriff department because he was running out of food because he got snowed in. They actually sent a snowmobile in to him. He's lived 5 miles off of Highway 36. So he's not in a mood to hear about global warming right now. It's just, I mean, you have these experiences, and of course, Humboldt County has been one of the counties least affected by the drought, but has been affected though individually. Individual underground basins have been dried up, and that's why I get more litigation about fights over water, especially also because of the increasing growing. Maybe those will taper off a bit now. But anyway, it is a situation. We need to be under pressure to be able to push for this. Now, oil prices are staying high, so there's probably still going to be pressure to develop electric vehicles, but there should be pressure on public transit, and why we don't have a rail system that's anything like any other countries, and we don't have high-speed rail at all. We can't get that going. We can't get into the 21st century of it. Our country should be perfect for high-speed rail. We've got over the stretches of land where there's nothing. But it's at any rate, and public transit is a mitigation, as well as infill and all of that. But we've just got this problem of the politics of the here and now, and not thinking about a few weeks into the future.
It's human nature.
I agree. I mean, it's to a certain degree, but we're going to have to overcome some aspects of human nature if we're going to survive as a species. And one of our traits is adaptability. Well, we better put that to test.
Well, my fear is that the adaptability will all come after the cataclysm, and that they'll just find a way to live with the world that we end up with as a result of climate change. You talked about human nature, and most people look at the situation and say, well, I'm 50, and I've got maybe 30 years, and then it won't be my problem anymore. I hear that from people a lot, and it's just like, well, you have children, right? And maybe you have grandchildren, and what about their children, and what kind of world do you want to hand to them? It seemed like back, I'm old enough to remember this, the 60s and 70s, and there was a sort of hopefulness about making a better world and cleaning up the environment. There was a lot of attention paid to pollution and cleaning up rivers, and the Cuyahoga River, lit on fire and all that kind of stuff. And I think there was a disgust factor and people just said enough. And, for a while that seemed to push things, the needle in the other direction. But then people just get caught up in their lives. Companies come in and they do their counter propaganda about climate change, as Exxon and these other companies have done for 50 years. And then after a while, people just, they just kind of shut off that after a while. It's just too big, too complex of a problem to have to think about. There's nothing that I can personally do about it, meaning the collective I, and just the usual people. And so people just shut themselves off, and that's not a plan for action. That's not going to move the needle in the way that needs to be moved, unfortunately.
Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, talks about politics, and he says part of the problem is that usually if there are issues and controversies in the political realm, one of them is more motivated and influenced by the cerebral cortex, and the other one by the lizard brain, the medulla oblongata or whatever. And it's usually the lizard brain politics that win out because it's the most intense. The cerebral cortex, unfortunately, unfortunately, that's where self-doubt and humility and all of those things are stored, and that gets in the way of being effectively done. I mean, I always love watching. I've watched it several times. The old movie 12 Angry Men. Because, whereas early on, I would say the liberals, quote unquote, let themselves get pushed around, but only towards the end of the movie they start to push back against the lizard brain quick decisions. Now, technically speaking, I actually think that I might have found guilty verdict with the actual evidence in that, but it would have been more on the lines of what's his name, who played the sort of businessman in there. I'm forgetting his name after all this time, but he used to do mystery theater. Anyway, but that's that's what it is about. It's hard to think. It's hard to think critically. It's hard to think with nuance, and it's hard to address problems with nuance. You want simple problems, and you want simple answers, and that is human nature, and that's what's always difficult.
Well, for my money, it's the monkey brain that's the problem.
The monkey brain. Well, that's true. That's we'll have to talk about that. I don't know exactly what the monkey brain is, but I have an idea. So we'll have to talk about that another time. All right, that brings us to predictions. This is the first time you've had a chance to do predictions, Matt. What's your prediction?
Well, my prediction is going to be a massive cop-out. I'm going to predict that Dave will be back next week.
All right, well, that's a pretty good prediction. That's going to come true, so we'll have to address that later. I am going to predict that the Dominion Fox suit will not settle, that Fox is going to try to find every way to get a continuance to buy time, but Fox cannot settle it. They would rather pay $500 million or whatever than the loss of their product. Because if they settle and have to apologize in any way or admit any aspect of this as truth, then that undermines the whole concept, because even the followers that we talked about that are in that bubble will hear about it. It'll seep into it. So I think that it's going to end up going to trial. And quite frankly, it is the strongest case of defamation, involving a media source ever. It does the very case that the MAGA and conservatives want to overturn, Sullivan v. New York Times, is providing them with some protection now. But unfortunately for them, those emails establish malice, establish actual knowledge. You don't even get to reckless disregard for the truth. So I don't think it's going to settle. I think it'll go forward, and I think Dominion will win, and Fox will just see that as cost of doing business. Until next week, stay informed and stay engaged.